Hey guys, Mr. O'Brien here. And again, in this video, we're going to be comparing the structures and function of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids in organisms. So what we're looking at here is macromolecules. These are large molecules, and these are the four large molecules that are the most important while supporting life. So again, this is your part 3 video of topic 2, organic chemistry. Now, the first molecule we want to talk about are carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates serve as fuel for the body. They are simple sugars and they are ring-shaped. And when we're referring to a ring shape, we're referring to this carbon ring that forms up there. So notice how it is a circular shape. That's one of the easiest ways to distinguish the shape of, what the molecule is. Now, carbohydrates can be represented by the formula CH2O to the nth power. Now, in all honesty, what this really means is that carbohydrates are in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio to carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So if you sit here and you count all the carbons in this molecule right here. So if I count them, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 carbons. Now if I count my hydrogens, I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hydrogens. And if I count my oxygens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have a 6 to 12 to 1 ratio, giving me that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen and oxygen. Again, easiest way to distinguish. So carbohydrates are simple sugars. It's like glucose. It's what gives your body energy. Again, made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in that 1, 2 to 1 ratio. Now, our monomer, or our single unit, is called a monosaccharide. Again, this forms a ring shape. Our polymer, or repeating units, are called polysaccharides. And the function that it gives us is quick energy. So think of like a candy bar, right? You're really hungry, like the Snickers commercial, right? You're hungry, you eat it, it provides you quick energy to give you that quick boost to complete your day. Now, carbohydrates are classified into these 3 subtypes. Our first one, monosaccharide. Remember, mono, one, saccharide, sweet, or single sugar. They're the simple sugars that are composed of one ring, the most common of which is glucose. So again, this is the monomer of our carbohydrates. Now, when 2 of those monomers form together, they produce a disaccharide, formed when 2 monosaccharides undergo a dehydration reaction to combine. And this is when water is taken out. So again, the most common of which are lactose, okay, in milk, maltose in a malt, and sucrose, which is a type of sugar. Then finally, we have polysaccharides. Poly means many, and they are long chains of monosaccharides linked by, key here is covalent bonds. Remember, sharing electrons, and they can be very, very large. The most common that we have are starch, found in plants, and cellulose, found in plants. Again, these are our sugar storage mechanisms that we have. So here's a couple pictures here of some polysaccharides. Starch is composed of 4 monomers. Glycogen, which is in animals, obviously is a split polysaccharide. Chitin in fungus, and cellulose in plants. Notice how there are multiple rings bonded together because polymers are large repeating units of monomers. Now, lipids is our next macromolecule. Now, lipids are hydrophobic, meaning they're water-fearing. So what this means is that oil or lipids and water don't mix. They're insoluble in water. So Mr. Otter over here, why I'm showing you him is because he has a lot of oil in his skin. This oil in his fur actually creates a waterproofing mechanism that allows him not to get cold and wet when he's swimming. So lipids are fats, and that's a key there. Lipids are fats. It's a long-term energy storage. you know. So lipids are hydrophobic, water-fearing, or insoluble in water because those hydrocarbon chains, those long chains of carbons, are actually non-polar, and that means they are not able to be dissolved in water. So when you pour oil in water, what happens? It beads up like you see here, and it will not mix thoroughly. Given enough time, it'll just separate out. So there's a couple functions of lipids. First of all, they store energy for long-term use in the form of lipids called fats. So when you think of fat, fat is long-term storage. Think about, what does a bear do? A bear tries to eat as much food as possible to hibernate for winter and get as much fat stored up as he can, because that's what it feeds on for the entire winter. Now, it also provides insulation for the environment for plants and animals. So when it's really cold, fat actually holds heat very well. They help keep aquatic birds and mammals dry because of their water repellent as well. Lipids are also the building blocks of many hormones and are an important constituent of the plasma membrane. So in your cells, in a cell that you have, there's that outside covering of the cell. That outside covering is actually made of lipids called phospholipids. And what happens is it prevents water from just flowing in there and flooding the cell. Now, lipids include fats, oils, wax, phospholipids. We'll talk a little bit about each one here coming up. Now, a triglyceride is, remember, what our body usually stores fat as, and it's made of two main parts that you see here. Glycerol, which would be this structure right here, and fatty acids would be the three chains off of that glycerol. So again, triglycerides, again, consist of fatty acids because fatty acids have long chains of hydrocarbons to which an acidic carboxyl group is attached. Now, saturated fats are when only single bonds between neighboring carbons are formed between hydrocarbon chains. So in other words, each one of these carbons is bonded to 4 different atoms. Again, the carbon is saturated with bonds. So saturated fatty acids are saturated with hydrogen. In other words, the number of hydrogen atoms attached to the carbon skeleton is maximized, 4 bonds per carbon. Now, these are the things that are solid at room temperature, like butter, margarine, things along those lines. Now, unsaturated fats are when there are double bonds between the carbons. And what a double bond means is that that carbon no longer forms 4 complete bonds with other molecules because of the double bond. So these are liquid at room temperature, oils, olive oil, things along those lines. Now, phospholipids are very important. These are what every single one of our cells' outside covering is formed by. Now, it's composed of 2 parts, a head and 2 tails. Now, the head structure is hydrophilic. It likes to be associated with water, whereas the tails are hydrophobic. And that's what actually gives our cell membranes that double membrane. So cells are surrounded by a membrane which has a bilayer. Bi just simply means 2 layers. So the fatty acids, the phospholipids, face inside because they're hydrophobic, away from the water, whereas the phosphate groups, hydrophilic, can face either the outside environment or the inside cell. Now, another type of fat we have are steroids, and steroids are distinguished by the 4 concentric rings. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's another one. 1, 2, 3, 4 rings bonded together. Now, a steroid is biologically active organic compound with 4 rings arranged in a specific molecular configuration. Steroids have 2 principal biological functions as important components of cell membranes, which alter membrane fluidity as a signaling molecule. So although they do not resemble other lipids, the reason that we classified them as lipids is because they are still hydrophobic. Again, it's the only one that doesn't have these long chains. Now, waxes are pretty cool. Waxes are usually made in nature, and they're made up of hydrocarbon chain with an alcohol OH group attached. So we're talking about beeswax. We're talking about the wax in the plants, and what these do is they create waterproofing for those organisms. So examples in plants are coatings on their leaves. If you ever feel a leaf, you feel like almost like a waxy coating on the outside. And what that is these lipids are on the outside to waterproof the leaf and prevent them from drying out. So lipids are fats, okay? And they don't dissolve in water. So that's one way you can actually ID them. Now, they are also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but again, they are in a much higher carbon ratio. There is no 1 to 2 to 1 ratio like we do in our carbohydrates. There's no monomer, therefore there's no polymer. They can be identified by the long carbon chain. So if you ever see something that's drawn like this, that's indicating all those carbons bonded together. It's an easy way to say, that's got to be a lipid. And again, long-term energy storage, okay? So it's not going to be used quickly. It's going to be used over a long period of time if we run out of other resources. Now, proteins are one of the most abundant organic molecules in living systems and have the most diverse range of all macroorganisms. So if you look here, this is an example of a protein made of many different individual parts. But it's not only about what it bonds to, but it's also how it folds and what pattern it folds into that gives them their qualities. Now, proteins account for nearly 20% of our total body weight, and they perform a variety of functions that include things like structural support for our body, movement, but whether that movement is inside our cells or outside our cells, transportation within cells, buffering against changes in pH, regulation of chemical reactions, and control via our hormones, as well as our defense mechanisms. So all of our antibodies that are being produced, when you get a vaccine, your body naturally produces these, or when you get sick, when your body fights it off. Antibodies are made of these proteins that help our body stay healthy. Now, the functions of proteins are very diverse because there are 20 different chemically distinct amino acids, or the monomer of proteins. And again, these monomers will combine together to form a long chain that then fold together to make our proteins. Again, 20 different amino acids in our body. Now, amino acids are monomers that make up protein. Each amino acid has the same fundamental structure. They're composed of an R group. The R group would be like our functional group. This is what gives the amino acid its quality. It's the only thing that is actually different between the amino acids. Okay, the R group is the only different structure, and again, remember, 20 different amino acids. So the chemical nature of the R group determines the chemical nature of the amino acid within the protein. It gives it its characteristics. Now, another important protein that is produced in our body are these things called enzymes. And enzymes are produced by living things, are catalysts in biochemical reactions like digestion, and are proteins used to speed up reactions. So enzymes help speed up reactions. So in this picture, this would be the thing that we want to break down. What enzymes do is create a perfect place for the chemical reaction to take place. So again, it binds, the chemical reaction takes place, the substrate is then released, and the enzyme can then be used over again. So catalysts speed up the reaction in the human body, and each enzyme is specific for the substrate. So in other words, one enzyme will only work for one substrate or a reactant that binds to the enzyme upon which it acts. In other words, an enzyme only works for one type of molecule. Enzymes function to break molecular bonds, to rearrange bonds, or to form new bonds. They do a lot of stuff. So let's look at the mechanism of an enzyme reaction. So number one there, that is our substrate. So I'm actually going to write that in there up here as well. So the substrate is what's actually being broken down or the chemical reaction is working on. So that substrate will bind to what's known as the active site. The active site is where the chemical reaction or the substrate fits into the enzyme. Again, where the chemical reaction occurs. The third one there, that is our enzyme in general. It takes the shape, it helps speed up reactions. And then finally, we have our enzyme substrate complex. So again, this is when the whole thing comes together and the chemical reaction begins to occur. So enzymes speed up reactions by lowering what's known as the activation energy. So activation energy is the minimum quantity of energy which the reacting species must possess in order to undergo a specified reaction. In other words, it's the energy needed to start a chemical reaction. So without an enzyme, you'll notice that there is a much larger activation energy. When we add an enzyme in, the amount of activation energy needed shrinks very drastically. What this does is allow the reaction to occur faster and it allows it to occur easier so that our bodies can maintain life. So enzymes create an environment where reactions can occur quickly and are not used up, meaning they can be reused over and over again, which means our body doesn't have to keep making them. So again, substrate binds to the active site. This forms an enzyme substrate complex where the chemical reaction occurs. The product is then released and the enzyme is able to be used again. So remember, enzymes in the body help speed up biochemical reactions in the body. They do this by lowering the activation energy. The lower the activation energy, the less energy is needed for your body to continue to work. Now, we also have these things that actually can stop a reaction by blocking an enzyme. So a normal reaction, obviously, we have the substrate binds to the active site, we create our product. Now, in a competitive inhibitor, we have this piece that is produced that actually blocks the enzyme and blocks the substrate from coming in. So in other words, we are no longer able to have the chemical reaction occur. A non-competitive one binds off the active site, and what it does is it actually changes the shape of our active site right here, preventing the chemical reaction from occurring. So we have competitive inhibition and non-competitive inhibition inside of our body. So proteins are molecules that make up enzymes in our body. Again, now proteins are made of stuff that's a little different. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. So the sulfur and the nitrogen are the ones that are different so far from our carbohydrates and lipids. Now the monomer of the protein is the amino acid. The polymer is the polypeptide. So enzymes and the building blocks of our body are what are the very important things enzymes do, proteins do. Remember, enzymes allow life to exist, but proteins also allow our bodies support. Now, nucleic acids are the last macromolecule that we have, and they are key in the continuity of life. In other words, nucleic acids are what make our DNA and RNA, or another name for it is our genetic blueprint of the cell. And they carry all of these instructions for the cell to function properly. Now, the two main types of nucleic acids are deoxyribonucleic acid. For us normal people, we call that DNA. And the other one we have, DNA is the genetic material found in all living organisms, ranging from single-cell bacteria all the way up to multicellular organism. Now, RNA, notice how it is single-stranded, not double-stranded like DNA, is mostly involved in protein synthesis. And what it does is it sends the instructions from the DNA to the protein to make our molecule. Okay? So, nucleic acids, DNA molecule stores the genetic information. So in this case, all the information that is found inside of your cells is actually found from a DNA molecule. So DNA molecule stores the genetic information and never leaves the nucleus. RNA is made to communicate with the rest of the cell. So our DNA is never going to leave the nucleus, but we have these instructions, the mRNA, which then leave the cell to our ribosomes to make our proteins. So DNA is like the entire encyclopedia. And you don't need the entire encyclopedia to do research. So RNA are like your notes. So DNA double helical structure is very important because it helps us conserve our genetic information. DNA has a double helical structure, which means it looks like a spiral staircase twisting and turning up. The nucleotide backbone is joined by covalent bonds, which would be, our backbone is joined by covalent bonds, right here, our backbone, and then our two strands bond together using hydrogen bonds. So two strands together, hydrogen bonds, backbone, covalent bonds. So again, nucleic acid, it stores genetic code in our cells. It's made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, which is the different one, and nitrogen. Monomer is nucleotides, polymer, nucleic acid. So again, it stores hereditary information. Again, this is in the form of DNA in our bodies. So just a kind of quick review. I know this is a long video, but there's a lot of information in here. So again, we have carbohydrates. Again, those are our simple sugars. The monomer of that is a monosaccharide made of carbon, hydrogen, and an oxygen in a let's go different color here, in a 1:2:1 ratio. Again, energy, raw materials, energy storage, structural compounds. Our lipids are fats. Okay, glycerol, fatty acids, steroids. So again, they're also made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but not in that 1:2:1 ratio. Energy storage, membranes, steroids, hormones are examples that we talked about. Proteins, the monomer that we have here is our amino acids. Our amino acids form together to form our proteins. Again, they have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, different ones, sulfur, and nitrogen. Okay, we got cho, chop, and chosen. So again, enzymes, transport movement receptors, proteins do a lot for our body. Finally, we have nucleic acids. So nucleic acids or nucleotides, they are made of, or the monomer is a nucleotide. They are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and nitrogen, and they contain our hereditary information in the form of DNA. So hopefully this video helps you out with the macromolecules. Again, there's a lot of information here, but again, it's all really good information to help you out. Again, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, all of them are large molecules. And three of them, all of them except for lipids, form from monomers into polymers. So hopefully this helps you out. Again, this is Mr. O'Brien signing off.